Good morning. This is Dr.A.Nirmala, Associate Professor of Zoology, Sri Shanta College for Women, Autonomous, Salem 16. Today, we are going to see the human respiratory system. What is meant by respiration? Respiration is the process of exchange of oxygen from the atmosphere with the carbon dioxide produced by the cell is called respiration. The respiration we call as the breathing. Next, what are the respiratory organs are involved? Mechanism of breathing is vary in different group of animals depending on their habitat level. In lower invertebrate like sponges, coelenterate, flatworms, like they are exchange oxygen with carbon dioxide by a simple diffusion method. Earthworms are used their moist cuticle, and insects have a network of tubules that is called as the tracheal tubules. They transfer the atmospheric air within the body. And in aquatic arthropods and mollusks were well vascularized bag-like structure. That bag is called as the lungs. That is simply called as the pulmonary respiration. In vertebrate like fishes used gills for their respiration. Amphibians, reptiles, birds and mammals are respire through lungs. Coming to the human respiratory system. This is our human respiratory organ. We have a external nostril. The external nostril leads to the nasal chamber through the nasal passage. The nasal chamber opens into the pharynx. This is a common passage for food and air. The pharynx opens through the larynx into the trachea. Larynx is a cartilaginous bag, that is box-like structure, which helps in sound production, and they are called as the sound box. During our food swallowing, glottis can be covered by a thin elastic cartilaginous like structure. That is a flap like structure is present. That flap like structure is called as the epiglottis. This epiglottis prevent the entry of food into the larynx. Trachea is a straight tube extending up to the mid-thoracic cavity, which divides into the fifth thoracic vertebra into the right and left pulmonary bronchi. Each bronchi undergoes the repeated division to form a secondary and tertiary bronchi, and the bronchioles ending into the very thin terminal bronchioles. And the trachea, primary, secondary and tertiary bronchi and the initial bronchioles are supported by incomplete cartilaginous rings. Each terminal bronchiole gives a number of thin, irregular walled and vascularized bag-like structure called alveoli. The branching network of bronchioli and alveoli are comprises the lungs. We have two lungs which are covered by a double-layered pleura. In between the pleura, we have a fluid that is called as the pleural fluid, which is used for the reduce the friction on the lung surface. The outer pleural membrane is in close contact with the thoracic lining, where the inner pleural membrane is in contact with the lung surface. The part starting with the external nostrils up to the bronchioles constitute the conducting part where the alveoli and the duct from the respiratory part of the respiratory system or exchange part of the respiratory system. The atmospheric air enter into the alveoli along with the foreign particles, but the foreign particles are clears, clear, clears and transport into the lungs. The clearing process is done through the gas which is present in the nostrils. And the lungs are situated in the thoracic chamber and they are anatomically an airtight chamber. Thoracic chamber is formed dorsally by the vertebral column, ventrally by the sternum, and laterally by the ribs. The anatomical setup of lungs in thorax is such a any change in the volume of thoracic cavity will be reflected in the pulmonary cavity. This arrangement is essential for breathing as we cannot directly alter the pulmonary volume. Next we see mechanism of breathing. Breathing involves two stages, that is inhalation and exhalation. We can call it as inspiration and expiration. During inspiration, atmospheric air enter, and during expiration, the air in the alveolar is released out. The movement of air into and out of the lung is carried by a creating pressure between the lungs. Inspiration occurs if the pressure within the lungs is less than the atmospheric pressure. That is, there is a negative pressure in the lungs with the respect to the atmospheric pressure. Similarly, expiration takes place when the intrapulmonary pressure is higher than the atmospheric pressure. The diaphragm and a specialized set of muscles, external and internal intercostal between the ribs, help in generation of gradients. Inspiration is initiated by the contraction of diaphragm, which increases the volume of thoracic chamber in the anterior-posterior axis. The contraction of external intercostal muscle lift up the ribs and sternum, causing an increase in the volume of the thoracic chamber in the dorsoventral axis. The overall increase in the thoracic volume causes the similar increase in the pulmonary volume. An increasing pulmonary volume decreases the intrapulmonary pressure to less than the atmospheric pressure, which forces the air from the outside to move into the lungs. That is the inspiration. The relaxation of diaphragm and the intercostal muscles return the diaphragm and sternum to their normal position and reduce the thoracic volume and thereby pulmonary volume. This leads to increase in the intrapulmonary pressure to slightly above the atmospheric pressure, causing the explosion of air from the lungs. That is the expiration. We have the ability to increase the strength of inspiration and expiration with the help of additional muscles in the abdomen. And average a healthy human being can breathe 12 to 16 times per minute. We can estimate using spirometer with our breathing movement. Next, we can see the respiratory volumes and capacities. Let's see one by one. Tidal volume, volume of air inspired or expired during a normal respiration. A healthy man can respire approximately 6,000 to 8,000 milliliter of air per minute. Next, respiratory, inspiratory reserve volume. Inspiratory reserve volume. Additional volume of air a person can inspire by a forcible inspiration. Forcible inspiration. The average of inspiration is 2500 ml to 3000 ml. Expiratory reserve volume. Additional volume of air a person can expire by forcible expiration. This average of 1000 ml to 1100 ml. Next, residual volume. The volume of air remaining in the lungs even after a forcible expiration. This averages 1100 ml to 1200 ml. Next, inspiratory capacity. Total volume of air a person can inspire after a normal expiration. Expiratory capacity. Total volume of air a person can expire after a normal inspiration. The inspiratory capacity we can calculate with the tidal volume and inspiratory reserve volume, and in expiratory capacity calculate with the tidal volume and expiratory reserve volume. Next, functional residual capacity, volume of air that will remain in the lungs after a normal expiration. This includes expiratory reserve volume plus residual volume. Next, functional residual capacity. Volume of air that will remain in the lungs after a normal respiration. Next one is the vital capacity, the maximum volume of air a person can breathe in after a forcible expiration. Next, exchange of gases. Alveoli are the primary site of exchange of gases. Exchange of gases also occur between blood and tissues. Oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanged in these sites by simple diffusion, mainly based on the pressure gradient, solubility of the gases as well as thickness of the membrane involved in diffusion. This is also an important factor that can affect the rate of diffusion. Pressure contributed by an individual gas in a mixture of gases is called partial pressure and is represented as oxygen and carbon dioxide. The partial pressure of two gases in the atmospheric air and the two sides of diffusion, it clearly indicates that the concentration gradient of oxygen from the alveoli to blood and blood tissues are similarly gradient present in the carbon dioxide. In the opposite direction, that is from tissue to blood and blood to alveoli. Tissue to blood and blood to alveoli. As the solubility of carbon dioxide is 20 to 25 times higher than the oxygen, the amount of carbon dioxide that can diffuse through the diffusion membrane per unit difference in partial pressure, it is much higher compared to that of the oxygen. The diffusion membrane is made up of three main layers, namely thin squamous epithelium and endothelium and basement membrane. Next, the total thickness is much less than the millimeter. So, all the factors in our body are favorable for diffusion of oxygen from alveoli to tissue, that are carbon dioxide from tissue to alveoli. Let us see in the next class how transport of gases will occur in human being. Thank you. Thank you, Ma.